I want to take on probably one of the most controversial subjects in our faith. And I think it's better that somebody like me takes it on instead of a preacher or a rabbi, because I'm just a brother. I'm just a guy who studies. I also have a little insight into this particular field because of my prior training, and I'll get into that. What I'm talking about here is the word porneia. What it can mean, what it can't mean. And I would love to know, of all things, why so many in our faith listen to what the church has told us on this subject. That's ingrained, and so we can't get rid of that. But everything else the church has ever told us is a lie, so why do you believe this? You know, if the church bats zero all through history because of lies, and why would you say, okay, well, they told me this, I'm going to believe this? But so many of us do, and we read it, we don't want to study it, and we just say, nope, that's got to be. And especially they'll say, sex outside of marriage is absolutely wrong and cannot be. How many tribes of Israel are there? As I recall, there are 12. How many wives of Jacob were there? Jacob or Israel. How many wives were there? There were 2. That means 4 tribes are not born of a marriage. You have Dan and Naphtali and Asher and Gad. Jacob wasn't married to them. They were handmaidens. So how do you justify that one? It doesn't work. So there's already a problem. And just like when we came to faith, we realized there's a problem with what's there. It doesn't fit. We have to do more search and study to figure out what the truth is. Let's do the same thing here. And it's a very important subject. And that's where it's almost really sad, because so many people are afraid to touch it. But we need to, because we need to know what the truth is. And God's not one, the Creator's not one to just put something out there and say, okay, I'm not going to discuss it, I'm not going to let you know about it. I mean, He gives us details to the nth degree. So if He's going to give us the details, why can't we discuss these details? But for some reason, there's just this giant fear on this subject. And maybe it's better that somebody like me, who's a nobody, is able to talk about it. If I lose people, who cares? Now, most of this is going to come, the context comes a lot from Matthew 5:31 with regards to a divorce. But just like everything else, if we're going to understand that, we need to understand the Old Testament first. Now again, let me actually go back to the handmaidens. Bilhah was the mother of Dan and Naphtali. Zilpah was the mother of Gad and Asher. So when you're claiming you can't do this, you've basically said that 4 of the tribes can't be in existence because they're formed from sin. And I don't think the Creator would do that. So let's walk this through. And again, the other factor in why this is so important is because of Acts 15:20. This is one of the word porneia is one of the things you have to stop doing immediately just to start this with the faith. So it's an important, very important study. And so let's not minimize it because it is so important. Let's embrace the study and work our way through it. Before I go back, let's do one last little aspect on the word porneia, which is, again, the New Testament. It can mean adultery, prostitution, fornication, which is premarital sex, incest. It's used 25 different times, okay? So I've looked through those times. Now, that being said, let's go back and let's look at the 2 chapters in the Torah that deal with these issues, okay? Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20. And we'll start with Leviticus 18 because that's where most of these things come from, okay? The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you. Do not follow their practices. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees." So again, you need to know what his laws are and decrees are to follow them. Don't just make up your own. Let's follow what he says. "Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord." Verse 6, "No one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relations. I am the Lord." So no sex with a close family relationship. "Do not dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. She's your mother. Do not have relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with your father's wife. That would dishonor your father. So even if he has more than one wife, don't do it. "Do not have sexual relations with your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether she was born in the same home or elsewhere." And that's again an incest issue. "Do not have sexual relations with your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter. That would dishonor you. Do not have sexual relations with your daughter of your father's wife, born to your father. She is your sister. Do not have sexual relations with your father's sister. She's your father's close relative. Nor do you have sexual relations with your mother's sister, because she's your mother's close relative. Do not dishonor your father's brother by approaching his wife to have sexual relations. She is your aunt. Do not have sexual relations with your daughter-in-law. She's your son's wife. Do not have relations with her. Don't have sexual relations with your brother's wife. That would dishonor your brother." That has a proviso. And make sure we know that proviso, because if your brother lives with you and he has no children and he dies, you then have to marry his wife and give her children in your brother's name. Ooh, so there's additional things to think about through here. Let's see. Do not have sexual relations with both a woman and her daughter. Do not have sexual relations with either her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. They are her close relatives. So that seems to indicate you could have more than one wife too. It's indicating you've got one. The woman. You can't then have another one who is one of her relationships. Okay. Do not take your wife's sister as a rival wife and have sexual relations with her while your wife is living. That's a rival. So we're going to get into that because that's a factor. Obviously, we have to deal with Joseph too. Do not have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech. And do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That's detestable. Do not have sexual relations with an animal and defile yourself. A woman must not present herself to an animal to have sexual relationship. That's a perversion. Do not defile yourself in any of these ways, because that's how the nations I'm driving you out have become defiled. Okay? Then going into verse 20, anyone who does any of these detestable things, such persons must be cut off from their people. So, were any of those premarital sex? And we can look in Leviticus 20 to add the last little bit to it. Okay? These are generally most of the punishments. If a man commits, verse 10, if a man commits adultery with another man's wife, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. If you have sexual relations with your father's wife, both the man and the woman are to be put to death. If a man has sexual relations with his daughter-in-law, both of them are to be put to death. A man has sexual relations basically with a man as one does with a woman. They're to be put to death. If a man marries both a woman and her mother, it is wicked. Both he and they must be burned in the fire, so that no wickedness will be among you. If a man has sexual relations with an animal, he is to be put to death, and you must kill the animal. Same thing for the woman. If a woman approaches an animal, they are to be put to death. If a man marries a sister, the daughter of either his father or his mother, and they have sexual relations, it is a disgrace. They are to be publicly removed from their people. He has dishonored his sister and will be held responsible. If a man has sexual relations with his mother with a woman during her monthly period, he has exposed the source of her flow, and she has also uncovered it. Both of them are to be cut off. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. If you have sex with a woman during her menstrual flow, and you knew she was menstruating, both of you were to be cut off. Yet the church has told you about premarital sex, and I don't see anything here for premarital sex, and they're saying that's the big sin, forgetting completely about what the Torah actually says. So if we can just get back to the Torah, okay, that would just be so nice. Do not have sexual relations with the sister of either your mother or your father. That would dishonor a close relative. Both of you would be held responsible. Man has sexual relations with his aunt. He has dishonored his uncle. They will be responsible. They will die childless. So we have a different punishment here. Okay? So if you do with your aunt, you'll die childless. If a man marries his brother's wife, it is an act of impurity. He's dishonored his brother. They will be childless. Again, unless your brother were to be dead and be married and living with you, then you have to. So, with that being said, let's walk through this issue, okay? Because I hope we've backed it up a little bit to getting what the law is. Now, there's one other piece we need to add to it, and that's Leviticus 21:9. If a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, she disgraces her father and she must be burned in the fire. But that's not just for a Levite, that's for a priest. So it's a very high just a very limited number of people that's going to apply to. Okay? And again, this being a prostitute, or a harlot, so that's a multiple situation. I hope that won't be an issue. The prostitute's also translated as a harlot and zanah, and it's usually translated as sleeping outside the nations, or sometimes as becoming a prostitute. So I would almost even think it's more of sleeping outside the nations than the other, but it could be. So we'll deal with it. Okay. Now let's look at the Torah as it describes situations where you have premarital sex. That's really a horrible thing because the church has told you forever how bad it is, and I'm not saying it's a good thing. So let's back up my words. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm not saying it's this thing the church has told you about forever. Church lies to you. A Sunday church will lie to you. Why would you trust them on anything? And that's going to be in Deuteronomy 22. Now in Deuteronomy 22, 13 through 21, if the woman is not a virgin when they're married, and the guy makes a claim to say, I don't think she's a virgin, if he says that and a parent show the bed sheets to show that she was a virgin, he can never divorce her, and he's actually fine, and he can never divorce her. But if he's right, you get to stone the girl for being promiscuous in her father's house. Now, how does this apply in our lives? Because these are rules for us. We need to know how they apply in our lives. If I'm looking at a woman and she is in her 30s and she has children, she's not a virgin. She has children. So it's pretty obvious that she's not. Can I then use this claim against her? No, because I knew she was not a virgin when I married her. Pretty simple. What happens if I'm the one that sleeps with her and then I say, well, she wasn't a virgin when she got married, and she says, yeah, I slept with you. So that's going to fall back in my face pretty big as well. You can't claim something when you're the one responsible for it. The other aspect, and I see this as a good thing to do in our faith, is marriage contracts. And so you should have a little box there for the woman, and she can click on there whether she's a virgin or not. And that way, because if she says, I'm not a virgin, then who's the guy to complain? Because he knew about it at the time. It's all over. It's taken care of. And if she is, then she's going to be under this provision that she has to actually be that. Now, again, finishing up Deuteronomy 22, If a woman has sex with a man and she is married, Deuteronomy 22, if there's an affair, you kill them both. If you rape a woman who is betrothed in the country, which is Deuteronomy 22:25, only the guy dies because there was nobody to hear her screaming. But remember, the word there is rape. Deuteronomy 22:23 and 24, if you sleep with a woman betrothed in the city, both of them die. Now, of course, she screams out that she may be safe, but then again, for her to do that, that's going to have to be a rape situation. But just sleeping with somebody who is betrothed. Now, here's where the key comes in. In Deuteronomy 22:28 and 29, if you rape a woman who is not betrothed, you have to pay a fine to her father. And marry the girl, and you're never allowed to divorce her. However, the father can deny her the ability to marry you. Even if he denies that ability to marry, you still have to pay the fine. That's Exodus 22:17 and 18. If you sleep with a woman who's a virgin, he must marry her and pay a fine. However, her father can refuse the marriage, but you still have to pay the fine. So how is it that you have a provision here that you are fined for sleeping with somebody who is a virgin premaritally, and that's all it is? You marry them, or you pay a fine. That's it. So, because it's a fine issue, and the church has told you repeatedly, the Sunday church has told you repeatedly, this is this massive sin that, hilariously, they don't know what sin is because they don't abide by the Torah. They don't care about the Torah. They just like making up their own rules. Let's abide by what this is. Now that we have that background, let's now look at the New Testament. Okay? And there are two things in the New Testament I really want to talk about on this porneia for a minute. And the first one comes from the Messiah, Matthew 5:31. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. The word there is porneia, usually defined as sexual immorality, but it can mean adultery, prostitution, fornication, premarital sex, which is premarital sex, or incest. And then we also have Acts 15:20. This is when we first come to faith. These are the things we cannot do. Instead, we should write to them telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, which is porneia, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood. Well, if we look at these, we're going to have to go back to Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 18 and 20 to find out what this porneia is, because those are the rules of what we can't do. The Messiah was not here to make any new rules. He was adding the intent and showing other aspects, but he didn't create new rules. And I think this is the thing that is totally lost, because we come from that culture where we look at things from the New Testament and these are the laws that we have, but again, we have to go back to find out what the law is. So porneia has to be an illegal or an illicit sexual act. And from those, you need to stop. And if your wife is guilty of one of these things, then you can divorce her without going to the certificate of divorce. Now, let's also think about this. If she is guilty of most of the acts here for sexual immorality that we've listed for Leviticus 18 or Leviticus 20, most of the time she's dead. If she's found guilty of an affair, she's a dead woman. You don't have to worry about divorce. She's dead. It's over. If she's having sex with animals, she's a dead woman. You don't have to worry about it. It's over. You couldn't do a divorce in time. She's going to be a dead woman. So, all these little things, It's over. So it can't be adultery, because adultery would be death. Now there's one exception for that. What if she's not found in adultery, but you believe she's having an affair? Well, the Bible gives us something about that as well. And you can take your wife to the high priest. He takes her to the temple or to the tabernacle, and he does a routine with her. She cannot have her head covered, and if she's pregnant, she'll miscarry, and her belly will swell otherwise, and she's cursed. Doesn't say she dies, just that she's cursed. So the creator of the universe can show you that your wife has been having an affair. You can divorce her at that time. You don't have to. I know that's really weird to say, but you don't have to. You can still reconcile, and reconciling is probably a good thing to show love. Goodness knows the Creator has shown us love. We've done as bad of things as possible, and He's still allowed us to come home and come back. So, be more like the Creator who does that and shows massive love. But if we use those words in that sentence, so let's assume we use that word adultery. Anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for adultery makes her the victim of adultery. That doesn't make sense, right? I hope we can see it. It doesn't make sense. And let's use the next definition of porneia. Anyone who divorces his wife except for prostitution makes her the victim of adultery. If she's already a prostitute, I don't know there's a victim aspect there. And if you knew about it, that's just getting disgusting. So let's use the next one in here. Fornication, which is premarital sex. Anyone who divorces his wife except for premarital sex makes her the victim of adultery. That doesn't work. So the only other thing here is incest. And that works. So in other words, you can divorce your wife for a reason. You have to go through both the putting away and the bill of divorce. But if it is an incest issue here, and this is where my training comes in as a lawyer. I was a divorce lawyer. I've handled probably about 4,000 custody and divorce cases. And I see this particular issue if you're in an illegal marriage. Okay? Then because of it being an illegal marriage, it's what I would call either a void or avoidable marriage. And so you don't have to go through this full process because it's a void or avoidable. So if you are married to your aunt, which would be sexual immorality, it would be porneia, and you don't have to go through the full process. The other aspect, because she is a family member, I don't know that you even put her away. You just void out that marriage. And I think, and hopefully we can see that and see that working through. Now we also have John 8:41, where the people that he was talking to claimed they were not children born of porneia, of an illegitimate birth. So what is an illegitimate birth? Has there been a claim that Asher or Gad or Dan or Naphtali is an illegitimate birth? Because I don't think so. Is there a claim that Isaac was an illegitimate birth? Because I don't see that either. Okay? Although potentially there, but it doesn't matter because God has sanctified that. And he has said, Abraham is the father of our faith. And not just that, Isaac then got the blessing below him. Jacob did it, and it was done to all 12 sons. So we're all covered, even though, let's be honest, we may all have a problem from our original birth. But it doesn't matter because the Creator is taking care of that. And I'm hoping this kind of gets in there a little bit, just to say, let's forget about what we were taught in all things. In all things, let's forget about what we taught, and let's go back to what the Torah says. And that's a hard thing sometimes. But the Torah is what the Torah is, and if he says that that's the law and it doesn't change just because you don't like it or because I don't like it, my belief of the law is irrelevant. It's his belief that makes all the difference. So we follow what he says. But again, I'm hoping we can see, we have a thing in Deuteronomy 22 where you can have premarital sex. You pay a fine, but you can have premarital sex. And that's with a virgin. So that's a fine because she's a virgin at the time. But if she's not a virgin, do you even have that factor? Because I don't know that you do. And again, we cannot add, we cannot subtract. It's not in there, but we only have that provision with a fine for a virgin. I'm going to leave it at that. Like I said, I know that's absolutely controversial, but I think it's always best that we get back.